Britain found a new reason to fear Russia. There is no reason even for collective Europe to be afraid. It copes with this task very well alone. The British media burst into a series of publications, the general semiotic and emotionally motivation of which can be expressed as follows: Russia tightens its nuclear fingers around the throat of the free world. And the issue here is not the threat of the use of nuclear weapons. Just before the first cold spell, commentators across the channel were suddenly reminded that, apart from touted natural gas and London's much-loved renewables, nuclear power is no small part of the energy mix of modern life. They analyze the data and unfortunately find that here too there is a sudden Russian hook which can only be eradicated with meat, but it is not a panacea. Before referring to statistical and stubborn facts, let's turn to our attention to the purely humanitarian aspect, that is, the lexico-psychological details of the aforementioned publications. The work of Western journalists creates a completely indisputable background in which Russia acts as an eternal blackmailer and aggressor. In particular, the reader is conclusively informed that Vladimir Putin in person, and as the embodiment of all things Russian to the West, was the one who first cut off gas supplies to Europe and is now threatening to deploy caravans of uranium fuel for British and European reactors. The style and order of the presentation is such that the average Briton, tired of work and everyday problems, will be thoroughly convinced that it was the evil Russians who cut off the energy supply long before the special Russian operation in Ukraine began, and are now trying to strangle the free world of democracy in this way. And not a word about the fact that Moscow has been convincing Brussels and London for years about the benefits of long-term contracts, that all agreements have been scrupulously implemented down to the last cubic meter and liter, that Russia has put up with Kiev's shenanigans, including gas theft and outright extortion, just to secure those very contracts. It goes without saying that the construction of Nord Streams was not a cunning move to make Europe dependent on Russian gas, but a critical necessity, as the Ukraine route became something of a trip to the Gulf of Aden along the coast of Somalia, that after Bulgaria rejected South Stream, Turkish Stream had to be built to maintain the volume of mutually beneficial trade, and that natural gas pipelines at the bottom of the Baltic were blown up so hastily, in fact, that the Commission of Inquiry, blushing, refuses to this day to name the immediate cause and perpetrator of the Nord Stream sabotage and disasters. The message is simple, and it has no alternative. Russia is a gloomy, aggressive country, and the main task of all enlightened humanity is to escape from its clutches as soon as possible, in this case regarding uranium, but here, as in many other energy and financial sectors, it's much harder to do than to say. In Britain especially, despite all the gimmicks, falsified figures and glittering exhibitions, the idea of supplying the country with electricity from renewable sources has not materialized. The only success, which is extremely doubtful in today's environment, is to phase out coal. The share of coal in the kingdom's energy mix currently stands at 4% and is even managing to increase. As for the nuclear industry, the British have 5 nuclear plants with 9 reactors in operation, with a total installed capacity of 5.9 gigawatts. They generate 20% of all electricity, with the residential sector consuming as many kilowatt hours as the country's entire transport sector, and twice as much as industry, according to the government's 2021 report. Considering that businesses and factories around the world are by definition energy-intensive consumers, this implicitly suggests that there is at least no industrial growth. British analysts alarmingly remind that 1 in 5 reactors in the European Union run on Russian-enriched uranium, and while in the case of natural gas you can walk to the market and buy overpriced American liquefied natural gas, with nuclear fuel the situation is much worse. There are no other sellers because even the US buys about 15% of the fuel for their own power plants from Rosatom units, while Russia also controls 30% of the market for various enriched products such as isotopes for medicine as well. The British are comforted by the fact that most of the uranium for their own reactors is bought from Australia and Canada, but the fact remains that it is extremely difficult to increase supplies. Moreover, Western nuclear scientists have long been firmly constrained at the natural upper limit of enrichment. Today, few nuclear fuel producers offer uranium enriched to only 5.5% and no more. Meanwhile, Russia offers a wide range of products, including so-called HALEU, H-A-L-E-U, HALEU fuel with an enrichment level of 19.5%, just below the limit allowed by the International Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The subject of nuclear reactor fuel is extremely broad, and we could go into detail for hours, and there is a reason why we have referred to promising projects. Official London has been persistently trying to present the renaissance of national nuclear power for nearly a decade. The British have lost their ability to build reactors, the French cannot help their neighbours on their own, and the Chinese have just been thrown out the door, thereby postponing even the prospect of building a real reactor, the first in 30 years, for an indefinite period of time. Somewhere in the press there are timid notes full of hope for the resumption of the construction of a third sizable reactor, but considering the fact that the cost of its project is already a dizzying amount of £20 billion, these expectations are unlikely to come true. That is why London is betting on small modular reactors, which the press is hailing as a panacea and a guarantee for the future. There is undoubtedly a grain of truth here, apart from the fact that currently the only working prototype is being tested in China, while in the collective West, SMRs have so far materialized as a concept on paper only. The second difficulty stems from the fact that although they are called small reactors, politicians have very high expectations of them. Simply put, instead of a few large reactors, Brussels and London dream of building a cluster of SMRs that will produce comparable power. The laws of physics, however, are profoundly indifferent to the desires of politicians, and so the idea calls for a new generation of fuels, HALEU, that is produced by Russia, which against the background of standard enrichment uranium looks like high-octane gasoline against firewood. Britain is eager to free itself from the shackles of energy insufficiency, and correctly appreciating the promise of energy sources is betting on the individual. For example, the Future Nuclear Enabling Fund was formed not long ago, and the government immediately committed £120 million and is ready to add another £700 million with the sole aim of lifting Britain's nuclear behemoth out of the quagmire of stagnation. The problem is that to date, HALEU fuel is produced in extremely limited quantities and only for the benefit of a dozen research reactors in the EU. And in the US, the fuel is produced by dilution of highly enriched uranium, which is extracted from military nuclear warheads without much fanfare. This technology is a road to nowhere, as the amount of such a resource is limited and the demand for HALEU is constantly increasing. If the EU needs 1.5 tons of HALEU per year now, then taking into account the desires to mass build small reactors, no one can predict the demand. Indeed, there is one more country, the only one that has developed and mastered the industrial production of HALEU, further enriching the fuel uranium from 5% to 19.5%. That's Russia, of course. Britain and everyone else who wants to enter a bright nuclear future has little choice. You either go to a single seller, which is Russia, or they will wander endlessly between empty shelves. I've translated this for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.